So without further ado, I would like to invite my panelists to come in. And one of our very own volunteers he deals with our student subchapters for all of our college. Griff Groen is going to actually be our moderator today. Thank you all, and enjoy your food, and I'll let you get started.
Great, thank you, Taylor. Appreciate our panel joining us up here today and being able to offer their expertise. We're going to have some questions we're going to have asked to them and get their answers. But first, let each of them give you a little bit of a background on themselves and share with us what they want to get out of today as well.
Thank you, Greg. Dowell Stackpole. I was the Chief Information Security Officer for the Bass Companies, which you may or may not have heard of, out of Fort Worth. The Bass family, most well known for having rescued Disney, and that turned out to be a good trade. And then more recently, Bluebell Ice Cream, yay. But we also had oil companies and property management and ranches. We had several 100,000 acres of cattle ranches, raised about 150,000 head of cattle, which, by the way, takes 32 servers, 16 fiber links, 24 microwave links. Cattle's a more technology business than you might realize. So I retired in last March, and I'm now working in private equity.
Jeff Shilling. I've been in the Dallas area for about 4 years. Before that, I was in the Northern Virginia, D.C. area. Couldn't wait to move here to Texas after retiring from the military after 24 years. Did a lot of what I would call enterprise level cybersecurity for the Department of Defense and the Army, and then transitioned into cybersecurity with starting on the incident response side, and then I worked with one of the leading companies in cloud cybersecurity here in the Richardson area for 3 years, almost 4 years, and then joined Epsilon. And as mentioned, we are probably one of the largest marketing companies in the world. Global company, about 60 offices, at least the ones that I've found so far in my 80 days there. Probably a few more I don't know about yet. But our job is full service marketing solutions, everything from your marketing mess for less to big data analytics and connecting some of the largest retailers and banks to their clients. So that's who we are. Thank you.
So I'm Brenda Macri. I work at Fiserv. We do money, not drugs. It's not Pfizer. And we do financial services. My division is money movement or financial transaction processing. We move bill payments across the United States in all sectors of all financial stratas and all different industry sectors. So I've been in the transaction processing industry for about 34 years. I've run the gamut for working with small startups to large organizations like Fiserv. I'm currently the division ISO for the bill payments division. And it is a challenging, ever-changing environment because it's moving money, it's protecting people's money, and people give up way more personal information than they should to the people that they pay their bills to.
Thank you. Jeff Koch, I'm the Chief Information Officer for Mill Creek Residential. I also wear the CISO hat there, so run cybersecurity as well. What we are is we're a developer, general contractor, and a property manager for luxury apartments across the country. So we have over 15,000 units under management today. We have over 25,000 in development. So we have a lot of people, a lot of residence data, big into Internet of Things and smart home technology and how cyber is affecting that for all the people out there that rent apartments. My previous background is I came from a Fortune 500 global chemical manufacturer where I was their Chief Information Security Officer. Was at that company for 10 years previously in a variety of other roles. So I have a lot of stories of fun nation state stuff that comes with that role as well.
Howdy. I'm George Finney. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Southern Methodist University. You might have heard of us. We're just down the road a little bit. We have about 13,000 students. And I like to say our claim to fame in cybersecurity, we've got the Darwin Deason Cybersecurity Institute. We have a NSA Center of Excellence for our cybersecurity program. And our student hacking club has actually this year placed second in the CCDC competition. So we've got I think a really phenomenal program, really proud of what we've accomplished. So I've been at SMU for 15 years now, a long time in this space. I got started in security when I was 9 years old. I was a latchkey kid, and I realized that I started getting into security because I would forget my key, and I had to learn to break into my house. Because we didn't have cell phones back then. I couldn't just call my parents. So fast forward, I came to SMU to get my law degree. So spent a few years here, and SMU made me an offer I couldn't refuse. My boss was Italian, and I've been there ever since.
Great, thank you all. Any students in the audience today? 1, 2, 3, great. Thank you all for being here. We always appreciate you guys making the time to be with us. So our questions today, we'll start off with our first one. Do you have a proactive security culture? If so, what are your top 5 priorities to help you take a proactive stance to protect your company? Anybody want to start us off? Okay.
Of course, that presumes that there's a kind of homogeneous culture. I would say that any company of greater than 2 people does not actually have a proactive cyber culture, because one of them is going to have less concern for it than others, and that's one of the reasons I think we were talking about some of this. One of the reasons why the private sector in the U.S. is kind of the bottom dog in the whole cyber space is because people either don't think about it or they're terrified. And one of the things that we have to do as cyber kind of professionals is to start communicating better the fact that there really are things you can do. You really can have better policy. You can have better, employee training, and not just awareness training, but do they really adhere to policy? And you can elbow your way into the budget talks to get the right kind of right-sized funding. Because as we were talking about in the hallway, one of the biggest causes of oversized threat landscape is underfunded IT. So anyway, if that.
So I have 6 pillars, but I'll only talk about 2 because I don't want to dominate the conversation. But the first one is that I like to talk about that no one likes to talk about is hardening the human target. I tell you, I can track back to every single data breach that has happened since the beginning of ARPANET, the first TCP/IP network created by the military. You're welcome. We also are the ones that didn't secure it. You're welcome for that as well. But every single cyber attack, there's been either a human mistake or a human miscalculation that was root cause to that allowed that particular attack to happen. And it's more than just security awareness and telling people not to click on phishing email. It truly is understanding how cybersecurity connects to everything that you do inside of your roles. So that's one pillar that we focus on at Epsilon. And the second one is I'm kind of lazy by nature, and I decided that my whole security strategy would just center around where the threat actors are trying to get. So we focus on a data-centric strategy. I mean, our user terminals are very important that we protect and resist against threat actors getting that initial foothold there. But I can tell you from my government experience where the threat actors have the biggest problems is not necessarily with your perimeter defenses and even the defenses that you may put inside of your user base. It's what happens in your environment between your application and the database. So building better developers, better integrating app scans into your DevOps processes is where you really, at the end of the day, if you're trying to protect your data, because I can tell you no one wants to read my email. I don't even want to read my email. So not so worried about people taking my email so much as I am using us as a transition point to get to our data. So that's probably our 2 that I'll talk about here.
So the only thing I would have to add to that is, and I agree with both of them, is that from an education perspective, if people understand why you're asking them to do something, they're much more likely to do it correctly. If they don't understand why, they're way more likely to just assume that nobody understands their job the way they do, and so they're not going to cause a problem by finding a shortcut and going around the rules. And we also focus, we're extremely data-centric. We look at where's the data, and that's really where I start with the protection and then move out.
Yeah, for us, I mean, hardening the human element's really important, right? And the education behind that, from fish test, and the second they click it, a pop-up screen comes up that tells them what they did wrong and why, you know? So that education component being key to it. But it's really securing the mobility side. So people, wherever they go, they want to be productive. Whatever they do, they want to be productive. So how do you do always-on VPN? How do you do, you know, a firewall on that machine, that endpoint encryption, et cetera, making sure that whatever they do, you have visibility into it, as well as securing it from a bunch of different facets of control. But at the same time, it's about the culture of the company and people being your weakest link. I was in the elevator yesterday with one of our VPs, and I was just showing him an imposter email that came from our CEO to the CFO asking for, you know, are you in the office? I need to do a transaction, right? We catch all these through our email gateway protection, but I'm showing it to him, and he's like, yeah, if I get anything like that, I know I just walk down the hall to your guys' team because I don't want to touch it, right? And so you can start to see that some of that culture bleeds in there. But then how do you do it on the other side? For us is the residential side. So we have our guys go out to the site sometimes, and we're building a building, right? Well, the IDF room that hosts all your switches and the entire infrastructure to every resident's room, it's not built to deck. So what that means is the wall stops, and you can literally climb over the wall into the server room, right? Well, that's a big gap that the construction team doesn't think anything of, oh, well, they could go tap into that network, and now they have all our resident data, right? So building those to deck, making sure they're aware early on in what their business is and how security ties into it has to be a big campaign of ours. From just the cabling of that facility down to how walls are built, we have to get involved in that.
You also see that with your contractors, the other partners you bring in?
Yeah, I have some of my team members here, and they'll think it's hilarious because the property managers, they're just trying to make things work, right? And they don't understand anything about technology. And so when a guy comes in on site, who knows whether he's legitimately from that AC company, but he says, oh, I need to plug in here, and then he just starts unplugging everything to plug in his stuff. And it causes issues all the time, right? So how do you lock that stuff down? You have to talk about physical security as well as the cyber side of it and the social engineering aspect that could come in with imposters trying to gain access.
I think culture is a really big deal, and it's not something that security alone can do by itself. It's not something you can move the needle on. And I think one of the things we're, you know, if there's a silver lining to the death penalty, if you've heard that about SMU, so back in the 80s, our football program was killed after there was a pay-for-play kind of scandal, and it's interesting because I think that's one of the things that's created a risk-adverse culture at SMU, unlike maybe some other of our peer universities. So that's something, again, that I couldn't have done alone. And you know, fast forward 20 years, it's still there today. It still influences the way people make decisions about products or about how we're going to do business. And you know, I think partnering with the business to understand the day-to-day things that are going to move that needle from being purely reactive to proactive. So I think where you can find opportunities to do that, to influence culture or to connect with folks, to build relationships, to kind of change the way business units think about culture, whether it's property management, physical security, or accounts payable. I think those are always opportunities. And it's really easy, I think, to just get into firefighting mode and to constantly be reactive because we see so many threats every day. But you have to kind of take a step back and think strategically about where you're going to be able to move the needle and how can you do that across your institution.
Since culture doesn't exist in a vacuum and it's not entirely controlled by IT or security, who else do you have to partner with to make this successful for your organization?
Everyone. No, so we've done a phenomenal job, I think, building relationships with risk management, with internal audit, with our legal affairs department, with individual business units. So I tell the story. We did a social engineering test several years ago, and we had a social engineers walk the campus, and it's fascinating, but he was able to walk into our HR department, and just as a test, you know, we didn't want to disrupt operations, so we said, don't remove anything, but he pulled my HR file from the HR file room. How did he get in there? So at the session the next day with all of the department heads, I made a point of handing it back to him. You know, here you go. And I think that was a big moment, right? That, you know, we had a great partnership with HR from there on out. But you've got to find those people. You know, find where your data is. Find where your partners are bringing data into your network or where it's leaving, and you know, build relationships with those people. And you know, you're not an auditor. You're not going to slap their hands necessarily, but talk to them. Be a consultant for them.
Yeah, I think the idea of everyone's really important, right? A lot of companies think it's top down. So if you took a vote in here, I guarantee a lot of the room would raise their hand saying, well, it has to come from top down, right? They have to tell me, I have to be aware of this, right? But I've seen that fail time and time again because the communication chain just doesn't exist that way into people's behavior, right? So one of the things we've implemented is a quarterly tech talk. That we do for the entire company. Now, does the entire company join? No, because they're not interested for a good part of it. But there is a portion of the company that is proactively interested in understanding how technology affects the company, right? And they join those calls and they learn a lot about what's going on, how we provide enhancements for them. We do a cyber awareness training as part of it too. So there's a lot of things that you can do from hosting more of those to draw people in, right?
So I focus on the human element a lot. And one of the things that we would do is I would bring in my nieces and nephews and when they were high school age, and we would just let them walk around with no badge in the secured areas and see who stopped them. And we would have somebody kind of strolling through watching what was occurring, and we would note down who didn't stop them and who did stop them. We also had somebody there because people can get very aggressive sometimes, so we had somebody watching to make sure the interaction was not aggressive, like someone tried to put hands on them and drag them to the door or something like that. But it was amazing, probably only 1 out of 5 people even questioned their reason to be there. And they would always say, oh, I'm here with, you know, my mom, not even give a name. I was just looking for the ladies' room, or I was just looking for the men's room, right? And people would say, oh, okay, but you need to go back to your mom, you know, and not question why they were there. And then the second thing we did to that exercise was anybody who actually stopped them and said, wait a minute, I need to call somebody, or who you're here with, and then we would come in and say, no, it's fine, they're, you know, we know they're there. We would give them a gift card. It was amazing the number of people that got stopped walking around without badges for the 3 to 6 months after the $25 gift cards showed up. And then when we started seeing people letting the pizza guy in to deliver pizza again and things like that, we would do it again. We would do the exercise again because people forget. They forget what they're supposed to do, right? The other thing that I do with the developers is when we find bugs, they're like, oh, this is not a big deal. It's probably nothing's going to happen. And I always say to them in those meetings, can you let me have your credit card? Why? Well, I want to use it to buy things because you don't care if the customers get their credit card taken to buy things. So I figured you feel the same way about your own. So I'd like to shop. And then that brings home to them exactly what they're, you know, oh, it would take somebody 10 hours to do that, or, you know, it kind of emphasized to them, you can't think that way. You have to look at each security bug you put in as important because it is to somebody and it will cause them a problem. So that's kind of what we do.
So this is going to be a big shocker to everyone. After spending 24 years in the military, I learned most of my leadership from formerly living generals. And one that comes to mind for this particular one is Eisenhower, and his theorem on leadership is getting people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. And in the company that I've joined at Epsilon, we truly are like 7 companies. We have 7 practices that all do functionally different things. in marketing and big data marketing analytics. And what I've found that works, and I love mixing metaphors, is when you go and sit into a room with some of the leadership of these practices, previously, as soon as the security guys come, they clam up and they don't share. And so I've been going around meeting all of our practices. I call it my listening tour, my learning tour. And what I found is to just sit and listen and hope that I become the priest instead of, that they'll confess their sins to, as opposed to the nun that they went to Catholic school that would hit them on the hand with the, with the ruler. And so I found that that works better. That's a better approach, and there is a little bit, obviously, occasionally in the security realm, you got to use the stick sometimes when the carrot doesn't work. But at the end of the day, I kind of go back to that leadership principle of getting people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. People won't do it out of fear when you're not looking, and so making sure they understand how important and how it applies to their job and the risks that they can bring to the company with a simple mistake that they may make in their everyday job.
Yeah, and Brenda, a long time ago I did some work at the Nuclear Fuels Reclamation Center in Savannah River for the Navy, and there, if you find somebody who's outside of badge protocol, you get $100. So everybody's looking, and badge protocol can be complicated. It can be escort required, and that means the escort has a matching color. And so, I mean, everybody's looking at anybody they don't know really close. Carrots work. There's no question. It's true, we have to get buy-in from all levels, but we have to remember that resources do flow from the top down. So you can't neglect to get buy-in from upper leadership because you have to resource the decisions that you're making. But then motivation definitely flows kind of bottom up. If people don't understand why, as mentioned earlier, if people don't know why you're asking them to do these things, they'll find a way around it. So since retiring from Bass, I've done a lot of consulting. So this isn't necessarily a Bass company. But I did work with one company that in the oil field, and these oil engineers are really smart, and they're really clever, and they will figure out a way around anything you want to do. And they need to hook a device up on a pad site in New Mexico and get the signal back to their office in Dallas. They're going to do it. So if you haven't convinced them that they're also going to give away the farm, then in other words, you have to get them on your team. You have to make them part of your team. And so that protecting information becomes important to them. Right.
All right, thank you all for your insight on those items. Our second question, there's a growing demand for advanced analytics when playing with the massive amounts of data. Is big data security analytics an effective weapon against rising cyber attacks? Let's start this one off with Jeff. This is kind of your area.
Oh. So the guy coming from the big data analytics company should be touting the use of big data analytics and security. I was hoping to actually go last on this one, but I think obviously, well, I'll go ahead and say I'll characterize both big data analytics and machine learning and artificial intelligence are all kind of the catch terms are out there in the security realm today, and everybody seems to, every product owner and every security team will pitch that as, hey, this is the silver button that you just got to push. Just got to plug it in, it's going to figure out your network, and it's going to work. I can tell you that doesn't work in any of the products I've ever seen, and when you actually talk to the people who created the products, a lot of times what you'll find underneath the covers, what they're really doing, they're all using a couple of Bayesian algorithms that are relatively the same, and that there's a lot of marketing behind the big data analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and I'll even throw blockchain in there. If you can get those four catchwords into your product, then you'll be funded to $1 million, and you don't even have to say what the product's for. But I will back up, and I will say the first thing that you should think about is the architecture that you're building, because again, the architecture will take care, and I'll be honest with you, I was kind of in jest, the ARPANET, thank you military for not securing it, but it was never, the TCP/IP network that we built was never built with security in mind, and that's where a lot of legacy companies are really struggling. Is they're struggling more with an architecture that's not built with the right aggregation points, the right places to put good sensors that allow you to look through the data and have that proper segmentation between what you're trying to protect and your outside connections. And then once you get the right architecture in place, then you can throw some advanced artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain if you want, to try to figure out what's going on inside of your environment. Because I can tell you, if you don't have the right architecture and right design, and if you think you can just plug in any tool in, and believe me, salespeople, marketing people will tell you that, then you're going to get a lot of noise and a lot of false positives.
So I'm actually a data analytics person. I love data. It's how I got into the business in the first place. And I think it's important to have it. I'm not dismissing it, but I worry about insider threat. And a lot of times, to Jeff's point, if you don't configure what you're buying exactly the way you should configure it, and if you don't train your people, so a lot of times when people purchase that type of gear or software, they're getting the sales message that you drop it in and it's magic and everything's going to be wonderful and you never have to worry, right? So that counts on somebody not having a bad day the night before. It counts on a lot of things that have nothing to do with data analytics. And if we fall into the trap of thinking our technology protects us, that's when we run into real problems. And that would be my comment on data analytics. Not that I don't like it and not that I don't think it's of value, but we can easily fall into the trap of completely relying on it and miss something really big.
Yeah, I mean, the human aspect's still highly important, but there is a lot you can gain from analytics, right? And it's how you configure it, how you set it up. Is it just a tool, or do you go open source and build your own? Now, I've been in 2 different companies, and I've taken 2 different strategies with this when it comes to cyber. One, I bought the big name tool. I followed that path, configured it to the best of our ability, and a nation state was still on our network for 190 days, right? I've done the other side of it where we're now in the custom development of a SIM that gathers all this big data, that correlates events together because I want it very specific to my use cases. What do I care about? Back to your point about what data matters most. Where is that data located? Who are my top privileged users that have access to that data? Understanding the risk to that data. Is it public risk? Is it exposure outside the company of loss of revenue streams or brand reputation? Is it a lawsuit possibility? All those type of risks, you got to quantify that against the data. And then you got to set in your mitigation rights. So how do you go mitigate that risk? Because that's essentially all the board cares about, is are you mitigating that risk, right? So does the tool set that you're developing and building do that with big data? And if it doesn't, then you're wasting a lot of money and time going down a path that isn't going to give you the right solution. So while big data is a marketing term and everything, it's been around for a long time. People have been collecting data and trying to use it to the best of their ability. Now we have some better tool sets out there to help us even go further with it, right? But make sure you understand what you're trying to accomplish with that mission and make it very specific.
I would say this is one of the hardest areas to get right. So we've spent an enormous amount of time over the last decade trying to make sure that we're getting all of the logs, that we're getting all of the information we need, that we're finding other sources, and the churn inside IT, right? You get new devices, you do upgrades, all of a sudden your log normalization doesn't work anymore, or you've decommissioned 20 servers and added 40 new ones, and you don't have them there. So even if you're doing all of the things right, the overhead, the maintenance of that is incredibly difficult and challenging. And you're right. If you're not getting, if you go to the NIST framework, right, this is a detection, response kind of technology. This is not a prevention technology. So if you're not doing right on the front end, you're not really protected, and it's still going to be a lot of resources on the back end to do what you could have done much more cheaply right up front. So.
Great. Any other last comment?
Yeah, so man, there's a lot set up here. I think, like for example, if you think about non-signature based AV, right? They all say antivirus, but what's really great about them is they analyze the code and what, are they are they attaching to the TCP port? Are they attaching to the keyboard? That's what's really good about it. The AI stuff sells it, and so you really want to know really what are they calling AI? But there are some things that the artificial intelligence and the big data, like if you're in a business that's going to take, for example, Bitcoin, you're going to want to analyze the actors that you're interacting with, and the only way to find out whether the wallet ID is involved in nefarious activity is to do some serious data analytics, and you're not going to find that out other ways, right? And so there's some really good use of big data analytics, but it's not the end all, change all, right?
And of course, you need to do it all in the cloud. All right, our third question. Another new trend in proactive security is threat hunting. What do you think is the latest advantage of these kind of emerging trends? I got to go to the CISO Executive Forum last quarter, and this was one of the items that the venture capitalists were bringing up. They are investing in this technology right now, so they see this as the next big thing.
I think it's certainly really exciting. So, my security team is fairly small. We've got limited resources. We've got 4 folks. So, again, once you get that data, hunting for those threats in your environment is really exciting. That's probably not something that I can do with my small team very effectively, right? I have to recruit those people. They're being heavily sought after in the industry. So, threat hunters might. I heard one person say threat hunters are making $200K plus. Out in the industry, which is just kind of mind-boggling. I'd rather skip a generation and look to maybe AI to do some of those things, and there's certainly some exciting startups out there doing stuff like that. Some of the existing SIM products, Splunk or Logarithm, both have their AI integrations. That's really cool. So if you can have a tool do that's awesome. I don't see us ever having a dedicated internal threat hunter. That has to be either a managed service or some kind of other offering. So I think it's cool. I don't think the industry is quite there yet. So it's still, I don't want to say vaporware, but it's aspirational, if you will.
Well, and I would specify too. I think that threat hunting's been around for a really long time. From a people side of it. I think what's really coming up is the AI side and the automation of threat hunting as it comes. Because I look back on my cyber teams over the years, and I've always had a threat hunter, but it's off of a hunch, right? Something blipped on a server, and all of a sudden they notice this other blip that happened elsewhere in the network, and they just thought in their head, that seems a little odd, let me go investigate, right? And now they're proactively threat hunting that issue that's out there, right, and trying to chase down whatever adversary may be in the network. So I think from that perspective, there's been an element to the human aspect for a long time, and why these people are so good is that they really understand how the network talks to each other. So if you're thinking about, I want to be a threat hunter because I want to make 200K plus, you got to go look at understanding the full network, understanding applications and how they work, how they communicate, how integrations work, right? They really know a lot of information to be able to do that proactively and well. But at the same time, I think where the software is going is really where the interest is. Because when you can start automating some of that and triggering red flags in your process for a team to still go in, I still think there's going to be a human element to it, but you will catch more because of it knows what is healthy or not healthy within your network, right? And I do outsource a lot of this because there's no way you can keep that type of staff on hand. When they're sought after like that, you do have to outsource that. Yeah.
I just want to say, I think what you're pointing out, there's a specialization in cybersecurity that's happening that wasn't the case 10 years ago. So the new folks coming in, maybe they're being put under vulnerability management and they're doing those scans, or maybe they got a job at Dell SecureWorks in a SOC, and they're very familiar with the ticketing system and a couple of other tools, but they don't have that background in networking and sys administration, and they can't get that big picture. So I think that's part of one of the challenges, is just that necessary specialization that's happening because there's so much more demand for security professionals now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to preface this by saying I'm speaking for myself, not Fiserv. Threat hunting is critical. I agree with that. The larger the organization, the most likely it is to have a threat hunting team, per what everybody's saying, right? So they're important. It's important. My concern right now about threat hunting, and the way a lot of private organizations are seeing it, is threat hunting is the prelude to attack back, which I have serious concerns about, and that seems to excite senior leadership more than the hunting itself, that they can find somebody and attack back. And it's funny to talk about and think about, but it can have very serious consequences. And, I'm going to school right now specifically on that at Northeastern, and counterterrorism and cyber, and the reality is, at the end of that attack back is usually people like you and I, not the people who did it. And that's where it gets concerning, when I'm going to refer to senior leadership as primarily civilians, get into this whole, I'm going to pay for the threat hunters because then we can do something about it.
So I was briefing my boss when I was at the Department of Defense level working security on our efforts to do threat hunting, and he, and it made me realize, man, I need to better define terms. He says, "What kind of hunting do you mean?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, when I go deer hunting, I sit in my stand, the deer walk by, I shoot them." I said, "That's hunting." And I said, "Are you talking about more like what the FBI or the Treasury Department does when they go try to find and track people down?" I said, "We're doing that kind of hunting." So really, the security controls are really only effective against about 80 to 85% of the threat actors that are out there. The rest of the 15 to 10% will find a way and are persistent enough in their tactics, techniques, and procedures to find ways around to get a foothold inside of your environment. And I think that you really need to attack it from two levels. I think you really do need to have the constant presence of your team in there looking for anomalous activities, knowing where inside of your network, if you were a bad actor, where would you go and sit in my network, Active Directory, software distribution centers, and then focus your collection, your intelligence collection, and your logging on those systems, and have someone with a higher level skill constantly looking for those anomalies and looking for things that threat actors, because most of those threat actors that have evolved to the level where you have to go hunting for them are no longer using tools that are picked up by your security controls in place. They're what we used to call at Dell SecureWorks living off the land, meaning they have their own accounts and they are actually they're another employee, another remote employee. So I think you need someone that understands your network and is constantly looking for that. But then I think it's also important, about once a year or whatever your budget can afford, to bring out an outside pair of eyes that may have different threat contexts that you may not have access to. Formerly, I'll plug Dell SecureWorks here. I used to work for them. It's a great top MSSP in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. They have over 4,000 customers, and so they see a lot of badness and catch a lot of badness from 4,000 customers than me as Epsilon would see and we're not currently a customer of Dell SecureWorks. But, so those type of hunting teams bring a different level of intelligence that they can literally sometimes just connect into your network stream and be able to see things that maybe your teams wouldn't have access to because they just don't have the indicators to match up to it. So I think bottom line is you got to do both. You got to have your own effort, even if it's very rudimentary, and then bring in an outside pair of eyes every once in a while.
Yeah, here's a couple, and then I'll give it back to you. All right. So, well, because a couple of things come to mind. One is the whole hacking back thing. You're probably going to break the law, so you probably should just shut your guys down if they think they're going to hack back, because there are huge penalties to that. And a lot of the stuff, and Jeff really pointed on this, a lot of the real hunting is going to happen with some kind of aggregator, because there's probably not enough information on your network to really do that kind of hunting. The average attack network is only alive for 30 seconds. So, and when you start tracing it back, you're going to end up on somebody's baby monitor, because they're not coming straight from anything. And that's where you need that. Well, and then we live in a world where most companies don't even use OpenDNS or any kind of DNS log scanner. So why don't we do some of those things first, right?
I was just going to add to this because I think it's a fun story for y'all, but executive sponsorship to threat hunting becomes very real. We had an issue in Budapest a number of years ago where a drone started showing up outside of our 11th floor window with 4K cameras looking directly into the building and spinning around doing a lot of other stuff. And there happened to be a couple other things that happened at the same time. So I was in front of the CEO, and he's a Louisiana boy, and he goes, "Why don't you just shoot that thing out of the sky?" And turns out it was there recording for a Tom Hanks movie. But it just shows you that sometimes threat hunting is wild goose chases too.
Yeah, to echo on Brenda's concept, most of the folks in the audience during the forum, about 50 CISOs, felt the same way. You can't do this spy v spy and keep escalating up, because the consequences of what's going to come back to you aren't worth the investment up front. But to be able to see the automation come into play definitely was what everybody was interested in. So our next one is, let's talk about the bug bounty programs. It's a preemptive measure some organizations are willing to implement. What is your take on how well this applies to effective protection strategy and the risk around it? And George, I think your story about the student might also play a role.
Yeah, so did I mention I have students? That I get free pen testing services from my student population. So I think, I kid a little bit, but, some universities, I think, will actually have sanctions against students who to stumble onto vulnerabilities in their environment. So I think the first step is don't penalize people who find bugs and report them, because then they'll just be people who find bugs and potentially exploit them instead of reporting them. So I think that's a good first step. We've done a lot of things. I think, again, going back to the human factor and changing culture, we've tried to do a lot of things to change the incentive structure. Not even necessarily reporting a bug in a piece of software, but just, hey, we'll give free vacation days away to folks who participate in security in some meaningful way. We've developed, again, I mentioned my partnership with HR, but we've reached out to them, and other offices on campus, we can give free parking, or we get free tickets to athletic games or things like that, to make it kind of exciting for folks to feel like they're a part of something, and even if it's just reporting a phishing message, we want to create avenues for people to get excited about that.
Do you need to engage third parties as well?
So sometimes, yeah. Yeah.
So I have yet to implement a bounty program that isn't just within my technology group, right? I've heard a lot of other people that have done it, and they've done it, typically with a rewards incentive base that provides people, the incentives to find the bugs. If you listen to LinkedIn ever talk about their bounty program, it's really interesting how they get their entire company, not just their technology teams, to look for vulnerabilities and submit them, because the top vulnerabilities found have bigger cash payouts. So I think that is an effective way to do it if you are going to go forward with it.
So we do not have a bug bounty program, but I think this all goes back to what I would call positive social engineering. We do unofficially, when people bring me security issues, number one, I ensure that it's confidential, because I will tell you that's super important, because I have people on all the development teams that tell me when a security issue is found and not being reported, and then I have to nose around and find it myself sometimes. And the first thing they want to know is, how did you know to check there? Why were you looking at that? So, exactly. So I'm very careful about that. And usually, I do positive reinforcement. We do not have an official pay-to-play type of system, but you know, we will, sometimes these are people that are interested in security, so we'll include them in briefings or, you know, do other things with them.
So I'm not a big fan of bug bounty programs. I really prefer using some really good, reputable pen testing companies that I think you're more effective because they're going to come about and check your environment out in a more structured way that you can do some analysis. And we have one of the best pen testers that work for us, and I say that really for two reasons. I'm going through a PCI pen test right now, and the guy happens to be sitting in the room here. So, but all seriousness, I think that there are some interesting things that happen with bug bounty programs, but I prefer a more structured test in my environment, and you get that with a great pen testing company.
Yeah, I think bug bounty programs, you have to be very careful. It's kind of like honeypots. You might get things you're not, there may be some unintended consequences. And so if you're going to have one, you better make sure you're positioned to respond and react. I mean, even getting a pen test, most pen tests, like 2/3 of the vulnerabilities found in an average pen test aren't plugged 2 years later. And so these are, you know, it's a problem. And if you have a bounty program, you better have a team ready to respond to it, right? So, yeah.
Great, thank y'all. Our next one, what do you look for when you're hiring security staff, and how do you ensure they're upskilled as the situation warrants? I think this one would probably speak to all of our practitioners in the audience.
So again, being a part of an educational institution, I think part of our mission is to create new skilled employees and you know, bring them to the community. So on my team, we've had a little bit of good fortune not having to hire a lot, but the ones that we have hired for, I'll tell kind of a before and after story. You know, I went through a position where it took me about 6 months to hire a guy, and we had to go out to a recruiter, right? You know, we didn't get a good applicant pool. You know, we were looking for things like certs and degree and years of experience. Because we're a small team and we need really skilled employees. You know, that's how we operate in a lean fashion. So fast forward a couple years. What we went through, I guess, call it soul searching a little bit, but I realized, well, hey, you know, we're a university. We, you know, have a great tuition benefit. I'd love to be able to give back to someone who's maybe mid-career and doesn't have some of those things. So I got rid of my requirement for certs. I got rid of my requirement for advanced degrees. And I got so many more amazingly qualified candidates that wanted to be a part of the university, that were willing even sometimes to take pay cuts. I got female candidates that, you know, we had a hard time attracting women in cybersecurity. So I think thinking about your requirements and, you know, opening up the market a little further to areas that you wouldn't necessarily think about. I'll also note again on the women in cybersecurity note. I guess, you know, women are much less likely to apply to a job. I've just learned this. If the requirement, they don't meet all of the requirements to a position. So I read a job posting a few months ago that said, you know, at the bottom, even if you don't meet all of the requirements for the job, if you're still excited about this position, please apply. And that speaks to getting more women to get into your organization. So I would encourage all of us to kind of think about, you know, what is it that's special about your organization? What can you give back to those folks? How can you improve the quality of security people in the community in general? Do you have good training options? Can you help people out with that? Can you sponsor people certifications, which is something that again that I think has helped us.
Yeah, and I would add to that and I'm sitting next to an educator here, right? But from my perspective, you know, I don't put as much value on the education as I do the experience. That's the first and foremost. While education is good, I'm a Baylor graduate, I'm very proud of my degree. At the same time, I don't think it provided me the experience that got me to where I am today, right? I think it was the other things that came along my path that opened that up. But really, there's 3 characteristics I look for when I'm hiring security people. It's craftiness, autonomous, and truthfulness. So craftiness is they got to be slightly evil. They got to kind of think like an adversary. They got to be willing to kind of push the bounds and, you know, figure things out. They kind of got to be that hacker type personality that wants to reverse engineer everything and really, you know, pick things apart. So that craftiness is important. The autonomy side of it is they got to be self-directed. I'm not going to be there overlooking at them. They have to have a passion for what they do. They have to be out there doing it on their own. They're the type of people that are at night, they're on Reddit, they're, you know, on the dark web searching for whatever. You know, they're those type of people that do those type of things, right? It's just part of their life. And then the truthfulness is that they better be able to sit in front of me and have a conversation and lay out what's on there for what's best for the organization and what I need to know, right? And that I can trust them in that role, that what they're doing is the right thing for what we are doing.
So a couple of things I would add. I think education is important from the perspective of ongoing education, whether it's formal education or it's someone, to your point, who sits up at night and reads as many articles as they can. I echo the points you made. I had an associate's degree, and that is all I had until 3 years ago. I'm now finishing up my master's. I got a bachelor's and a master's within the last 4.5 years. So as a woman, I have always done that. I always hire into the next job I want. I learn as much as I can about it and apply to those jobs. And you don't get most of them, but you do get the ones you really need to get, and you keep moving forward. And I would say that applies whether you're a man or a woman. So in all my job descriptions, things like a degree, we list as a nice to have, or, you know, a certification. They're always nice to haves. But the way I hire into my teams, I structure my teams deliberately to have juniors, middle tiers, and seniors, because the reality is in this market, I work for a financial services organization. One of them's in this room. I'm going to lose my senior people who no longer works for me sooner or later, and I have to be training those other folks up. I don't want to be hiring into my senior roles unless I absolutely have to, because the ramp up is incredible. We have 14 data centers and 182 applications. Trying to get a senior person to understand the complexity of that environment, I lose the first 6 months. A junior is not going to have to know that. They're going to come in and be learning on the job, which is fine, right? So that is what I take. The second thing, it is very important that they fit with the team, and I hire into what we don't have. Whether it's junior, senior, or middle, I say to myself, what don't we have in this team? Because everybody has different interests. Some people are interested directly in cyber. Some people are interested in pen test. Some want app security. Some are networking security. So what did we lose? What do we not have? Because I'm not omnipotent. There's no way I can know every single thing we need to know to protect our environment. So I need to make sure I'm hiring into having coverage. So when you're applying for jobs, you know, it's important to put things that you like to know about, that you learn about. Maybe you're not doing on your current job. I look for that on resumes. Even if somebody's not physically doing it, if they can answer the questions and it's obvious they're interested in it, that's a skill set I'm looking for. Also, never answer a question. I come to you and ask you what to do. When I ask you, how do you solve a problem?
I'll talk about transitioning people over from IT to security, because actually I'm going to tell you the big secret. Security is IT. I personally am skeptical when I see resumes of people that have strictly no IT background or no functional start in some type of IT service management, and then come straight, you know, and they've done nothing but security, went and got a security degree in college, because what they're missing is a lot of times the context of what it is they're trying to protect against, because they don't really understand how the whole system is put together. To me, the perfect candidate is somebody that hits the trifecta. Did a little bit of network management, network engineering, did a little bit of software development, or and then the last piece was did sysadmin. Man, if they did Linux and Windows, man, you grab that person, you hug them really hard, because those are really the three functional areas that translate into security when it comes to host level forensics, network level forensics, and then malware reverse engineering. You have to have those three functional areas and be pretty deep in all those in order to be an effective cybersecurity operator. And I can tell you the best one I've ever run into, I worked with at my last company, he was exactly that profile. And he ran basically for one of the local school districts here, he was the IT guy for the whole school district. And he did a little bit of everything. And then that guy went up to the NSA and I can't really say what he did up there, but he was very good at what he did there. And then we were very fortunate enough to bring him back to Dallas and worked at my last company. So that's kind of what I look for is. I'd still would like to see that they have the baseline skills across the IT function, those three IT functional areas, either self-taught or it's a hobby. The other thing is when I was interviewing, when I was at SecureWorks and I had to hire a bunch of incident response guys, I went to probably one of the best colleges in the country for incident response. Actually, there's two. One's here in the Dallas area, Richmond, and then another one's Champaign College up in Vermont, have two of the top forensic programs in the nation. And as I interviewed the people when they came in, I would ask, they'd already been through all the technical interviews with my directors and managers, so I'd ask them, explain to me what your home network looks like. And if they answered, well, I plug into my router and I get, I use WPA2 if they even knew that. That was a lot of the answers I got. The one guy who was very interesting, he leaned forward and he says, "Why are you asking?" And I said, "Well, I want to know more." And then it turned out that this guy had this big, huge gaming network. And so it has, if somebody's coming in young, if it's something that they just do at school, to get a good grade and hopefully get into a very lucrative field, then I'm not very interested in that. You're looking for a passion. Yeah, I'm looking for the passion.
Yeah, I think the idea of a cyber job is that it covers so much. So if you're trying to build out an ELK stack, yeah, you need the Linux guy. You're going to need a lot of serious programming help. If you're trying to staff your SOC, you have a different skill set. If you're trying to set up a blue team, red team, another skill set. If you're trying to get somebody who can really understand and communicate the need for data classification, they may not be that technical, but they can communicate really well, and they can sell well, right? So really, a lot of it just depends on what part of the cyber world you want to be in. I will say that I had great success hiring out of the military. The military does an excellent job of training up cyber. Yeah, well, it's just true. I don't think I've ever hired anybody with a cert. Which, sorry if you're somebody here from SANS or from, but one thing I wanted to talk about, George, because you brought up the idea of women, in IT. So I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but I've been to a lot of technology gatherings over the several decades, and it's almost always a huge majority men, until I went to DEF CON. Have you noticed that DEF CON's about 40% women? If we could figure out why that is, maybe we could start figuring out how to attract more women into IT and get the richness of the value that they would bring to it. So,
I'm also a huge proponent when you're talking at the junior levels of interns. And I think the reason is that I came from an internship that landed me my first job, and I think paying back that way is really important. Internships teach you a lot, especially if you treat your interns like you would treat an employee, right? And I think that's the key there is give them responsibility, give them real work, watch that flourish them, and you really see, hey, is this now worth investing X salary post-college in this individual, right? We've had interns that have joined us for just a summer. We've had interns join us for the whole year because they figure out how to schedule their classes around work days, right? And you can get a lot of productivity out of that. and at the same time, they get real hands-on experience that then ends up leading to a really good hire because you know what you have.
Well, I want to be sensitive to our time here. I know we still have our door prizes to give out. So if you have any questions, we'll ask our panel to stay behind a little bit, and you can come up and ask them individually if you don't mind. And this weekend, on Saturday, is Armed Forces Day. So for any of our veterans or currently serving, thank you so much for your service. We appreciate that. And a great hand for our panel. We appreciate them being here today and for all of y'all. So back to Taylor. Thank you.
Thank you all very, very much. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think that the diversity of the group really showed, and from the different verticals, so thank you so much. We have 1 or 2 minutes, so if you want, anyone have any questions that you would like to ask in particular?
None of my former employees are eligible.
Anyone in the back? All right. Coming forward here. Hi, Mark. Mark has a question.
Hi, I've got a resourcing question for you. I was curious what types of things you've gone through in order to move the discussion about investment in cyber defenses from an annual budget negotiation to where it should be, which is a more proactive and I guess a broader risk culture within an organization. How do you move that discussion from where it is today for a lot of organizations into a broader risk discussion?
Anybody want to answer that? Jeff? No? I'm playing Vanna.
Where I found where you win more arguments or you get more attention from the decision makers on resources, and that's what you're talking about, applying resources, is when you can tie the risk back to revenue risk. Because I can tell you, business owners, that's all they really think about. CFOs, CEOs, if you can show them the platforms that the customers are using, and then put it into terms of what's that risk level of those platforms, and then how's that tied to revenue. They start to visualize, how do I lose that revenue? You know, a lot of folks tried the cost avoidance approach where, hey, you know, I just looked at the Panama report this year like I do every year. It's $141 per record. I could say, trust me, we have a lot of records at Epsilon. I could throw out a big $1 billion number, but if it's not real to them, if they can't see, you know, that how it actually impacts them day to day with their customers, I think that's the lens you got to put over to win over the business owners.
Yeah, I think 3 things come to mind. One is, and we're seeing a trend along these lines, that board members are beginning to become concerned. And so we've had several calls from board members who introduced us to companies. So that's kind of from the top down. The second thing is on training. You need to go, I mean, know before is awesome, but you need to go beyond that and start getting some kind of, people have to understand more about what good digital hygiene looks like. So you have to start getting them thinking, so to drive it from the bottom up. And then I think, I had a third one, which got driven out, I guess. But oh yeah, the third one was probably the most important is I think we're going to see a big push from insurance companies. So that currently insurance products are actually pretty lame. And in fact, interesting, ask your clients or your company that you work for, does your insurance cover social engineering? Because the vast majority of insurance policies don't cover a breach that there's a human involved until you ask them, and then they'll write it. So the insurance companies are trying to come up, they're trying to understand their risk better, and I think when they do, then they'll see that there's going to have to be some kind of standard assessment, something a lot deeper than the 40-page questionnaire that they give, that everybody answers the questionnaire by looking at what it does to the premium. And then when they get the premium as low as they can, that's how they've answered it. So that's my thoughts on that.
So the only thing I would say about resourcing is I take the risk-based approach, but the other thing is we're integrated. A lot of what we do, I go out and talk to clients. And being able to talk to clients, not in the detail level, but at the high level of how serious we are about security, and it has to translate into the spend and the size of the team, and I can talk to all those things. I have been part of some of the larger deals that we have closed in the last 3 years. And that goes away, right? And that's the conversation you also have. It's a revenue impact. You know, if you lose that capability to speak to that, if you're behind every other competitor and what they're doing, they're going to know it. The client or the prospect is going to know it because the other people are going, the other partners are going to go in there that they're trying to partner with and talk about these things. And it is revenue impacting to not be doing them.
GDPR is helping bring that into the conversation.
That is true.
I'll turn it back to you.